because hopefully there will be a theme that goes throughout everything we talk about today, which is what's the business implication of the sustainability work you want to do?
Welcome to Grounded, the Sustainable Business and Careers podcast, where we explore how professionals, especially those early in their careers, can shape their work to include making a positive impact on the planet. I'm Michael Jordan, a professor of management and sustainable business at the University of Oregon's Lundquist College of Business. Grounded is an independent production informed by my work at the university, but not an official U of O program. This podcast is part of my personal mission to help the next generation of business leaders build meaningful careers, and to show that the methods of good business are also the methods of sustainable progress. Each episode, I talk with leaders, innovators, and frontline staff, sharing ideas and insights you can use to shape your own path. Let's get started. Today, I'm joined by Rob Bernard, the Chief Sustainability Officer at CBRE, where he leads efforts to help clients decarbonize the built environment, navigate new regulations, and achieve strong economic returns through the lens of sustainability. Rob's career has always sat at the intersection of business, technology, and environmental impact. Before joining CBRE, he spent 2 decades at Microsoft, where he served as the company's first chief environmental strategist, establishing a global framework for how the tech industry approaches carbon, climate, energy, water, and waste. He's also founded a private equity fund focused on circular economy investments, advised companies like National Geographic and Allbirds, and serves on the board of eCore International. Rob earned his bachelor's degree from Columbia University and an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. In our conversation, Rob shares observations from leading sustainability initiatives in both high-tech and corporate real estate, how to create effective company partnerships, tactical advice such as why an internal carbon tax can be a powerful tool for driving change, and of course, his advice for students and early career professionals who want to make an impact in this space.
And it gets back to the whole where's the win-win-win scenario? If it's not going to be great for customers, it doesn't matter if you create a great partnership because nobody's going to care.
Rob, I just wanted to thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Michael, thank you so much for inviting me.
You know, you had started in corporate sustainability in the early 2000s when you were at Microsoft, and I have so much I want to ask you about that relates to that journey and your different experiences at different companies. But I thought, because my students always ask me about how people get into from here to there in their careers, and I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about, because you were in other jobs, non-environmental jobs at Microsoft before you went into that field, and I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about your pivot into the world of corporate sustainability and how did that happen?
Sure, happy to share. And I think, the reality, and it's funny, I was just having this conversation yesterday with somebody sort of who, the same vintage as me. We go back to sort of 2008, about 2010 together. And we were both saying the same thing because he often gets asked this question as well. He's been very successful. We were kind of at a point in time in history when there just weren't a lot of sustainability people.
Yeah.
So in my case, I'd met a lot of people within Microsoft at a fairly senior level who I just kept saying, we need to be in sustainability. We need to be in sustainability. So I'd sort of built a reputation for the person who was positively suggesting that we should get involved on, environmental issues and sustainability. And so when the moment came where there was something that needed to be addressed, it fell on my desk. And then I felt like, oh, this is the opportunity for us to open up the conversation within Microsoft. And so, actually my role there was, very much like a chief sustainability officer, but we called it chief environmental strategist, which for specific reasons was deliberately different. And so that's sort of how I got into it. I had a personal interest in it. I read a ton. I joke, and it's true. I went to business school and I took the only environmental economics course that the school offered. It was UPenn. There were 4 people in my class. I went back 20 years later to teach the class and it was sold out.
Wow. I believe it. Yeah. Well, so it sounds like your interest in environmental issues came before you started working on it as a professional path.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But you didn't study it specifically because, well, it sounds like maybe there
There was
wasn't.
no place to, I studied, I took every class there was on
Yeah.
environmental economics, and that was one. So yeah, I studied it as much it could be studied. I actually I audited some classes at the environmental school and the grad school at Penn while I was there just because I was interested in it. So
Mhm.
I did a bunch of ecobiology courses, environmental biology courses as well.
Sometimes that can be even better to kind of have to choose those different perspectives, different fields to study, and then put it together in a way that really works, as opposed to maybe having it be prescribed to you. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, it again depends on where you are on the journey. There are many paths. I mean, I know a lot of chief sustainability officers. There are many paths, many
Hmm.
paths.
Well, and I saw just still from kind of the time machine. I think I saw uh, in your background that at Microsoft you had a role in deploying an internal carbon tax.
Yes.
Um, And I know that not only is that a fairly innovative thing, especially depending on when you do take such a move, but it's also can be pretty hard to get approved by especially big companies, right? So, but I'm wondering, I know it was a while ago, but can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
how the tax worked and how it encouraged good behavior and what did it take to get that going?
Sure. And maybe this is a good point in the conversation because hopefully there'll be a theme that goes throughout everything we talk about today, which is what's the business implication of the sustainability work you want to do?
Hmm.
So we're talking now circa 2011, 2012, when we started working on this carbon tax. And the reality was that in order to do the work that we wanted to do, it was going to cost money, right? And my expectation was that each year, the amount of money it would cost to do certain things would increase, right? We were going to commit to being carbon neutral, which meant we had to buy RECs and offsets, which had a certain budget associated with it. We certainly did not foresee the growth of data centers as it's turned out, but we knew there was going to be growth. And so option one is every year go to the CFO and ask for a budget, right? Which is kind of what we've been doing. Option two is saying, no, what do we need to run sustainability across the whole company? What needs to be true in order for us to achieve our objectives? How much will that cost? Not just RECs and offsets, but capital projects, all sorts of stuff. Great. Why don't we actually push the accountability to the teams that are driving the behavior that creates the carbon? And then it does two things. One, for those groups at the size and scale of Microsoft, it would almost be an exaggeration to say it was a rounding error.
Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't, but it was the opportunity for me to sit with the leaders of each of those P&Ls and talk about the role sustainability could play in helping them grow their business and why it wasn't just a tax. And so the tax was not only about the fee and the tax, it was about the governance model, which allowed me to meet with senior executives at the company, some of whom I was already meeting with, but some of whom were like, hey, this isn't really my area. I don't really need to engage on this. It was like, no, now you need to engage on it because you have a tax. And then from there, we actually started to raise more capital and we started to create a fund. And then anybody at the company could apply to the fund for any sustainability or environmental related initiative they wanted to do. Or a lot of offices applied and said, hey, we need to do some retrofits in our space. We don't quite have the budget. Could you actually give us the extra 5-10% that we need to go do those projects? And so it really blossomed, frankly, far larger than we thought it was going to be when we sort of kicked it off. And I think it was 2012.
That I really like how it connected or created a platform for you as an expert in this field to have that conversation with leadership or leaders and management about how to make the best use of the money, right? They're making this investment. And so automatically they'd want to talk to you about, well, what are we getting in return for this, right?
Yeah. No, and it's good. And I think one of the keys is why should the other person care? I know why I care, but ultimately most people don't care why I care, right? I want to understand why they should care or at least help them see like, oh, this is why this is relevant to you, even if you may not have thought it was.
Well, and so then or now, and I'll get back to kind of your transition from Microsoft to your current role, but I'm wondering just on the theme, do you have any favorite anecdotes about seeing that change of heart and change of mind amongst other leaders who sort of came around to understanding and maybe even becoming champions of sustainability despite early resistance?
Yeah, you know, it was great. I didn't really, with one or two exceptions, I didn't have a lot of resistance
Hmm.
internally. I did have, like a fun story for me is uh, I was meeting with a guy named Amory Lovins, who founded
Yeah,
Rocky Mountain Institute.
yeah.
And we were having a big debate about how much more energy Windows uses because the software keeps expanding in size. And the debate I had to him, I said, Avery, if I write a whole bunch of lines of code and it takes a little bit more processing power, but the processing power in the code enables Windows to be far more efficient at sleep, isn't that a good use of software and code? And then he said it was pushing back on it. And we went at it probably over the course of 2 or 3 years having this debate, because one of the things we did in our team is we looked at every product that uses Windows. So you can imagine it wasn't just Microsoft, it was think of
Mhm.
all your favorite applications. And at that point in time, things that use video actually prevented your laptop from going to sleep. So now
Uh,
back to your thing, when I went to the Windows engineering team, I was able to say, like, look, we need to actually hyper focus on all of these services that force Windows to stay awake and force our clients to use more energy and spend more money. So that would be an example of sort of both inside and outside, how we had to sort of take the moment to leverage and change the way the industry thought about something as fundamental as when you have a billion plus machines out there, the implications of keeping the machine awake versus letting it sleep is just massive.
mhm. Yeah, having done a lot of energy efficiency work, I always hear from engineers, right? The first thing they want you to do is just start turning things off that you're not using. And if you can automate that with software, even better.
Yeah.
But I could see where that might even be controversial in some ways about is this where we want to spend our time is figuring that out or not? I don't know. Huh.
Yes. So
Uh, well, and going from one of the world's largest technology companies to the world's largest real estate services company as the chief sustainability officer at CBRE, do you have, I mean, you must have observations about what feels the same or what feels different. The cons- anything, what can you tell us about how you've noticed uh, what's been similar in these senior roles at two very different operating models, or what's been different?
yeah, I think so. The things that are absolutely the same, like let's look at patterns. So we already talked about one. I'm probably going to talk about it so much people are going to be like, okay, we got your point, which is like, what's the business outcome that's to the advantage of the people that you talk with in your company? Right. So the topics are different. I'm not talking about Windows or data centers, right? I'm talking about all sorts of things that a brokerage business or an advisory business or transactions or project work. Like we're talking about different things, but it's the same thing, which is why should the team that's actually talking to the customer find this conversation relevant? And especially in this moment in time, and I'm sure we're going to talk about what's going on geopolitically, where the tailwinds that were sort of buffeting sustainability from, let's call it circa 2018, but really 2020 through 2023, 24 a little bit, have really died down,
Mhm.
right? And I've seen this movie many times in my 20 years working on this. So the question is that now it becomes even more imperative for us as sustainability professionals to really hone in on that issue. So that's absolutely the same between. Now, of course, the cultures are different, but when you work at a company which is over 100,000 people, which is both of those, a lot of it is about, like, if I say the second lesson is not just think about the business thing, is network, 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 network. So
Mm.
talk to everybody, especially when you're new at a company. Like, I'd go like, hey, Michael, like, I mean, CBRE very well. It's like, hey, Michael, who do you think I should talk to? Oh, you got to talk to so-and-so and so-and-so. And you go talk to those people. And they're like, go talk to so-and-so. And like my first 6 months, and I'm not exaggerating because I took notes, I met with well over 200 people.
Mhm. Smart. How have you found the conversations about sustainability issues to very, um, or just in general, what have you talked about with people at CBRE that you might have never thought of having to talk about at Microsoft or other companies?
That's a good question. I certainly wasn't thinking about capital stack as much at Microsoft as I am with real estate developers, right? It
Hmm.
was just different, right? The ROI models were different. And we didn't have this, I'd say one of the big challenges in real estate is this whole idea of like who pays for what. So you have landlords who want the tenants to pay for everything and tenants who want the landlords to pay for everything. So you've got this tension in the system, which was new for me as a challenge, still is a challenge to think about how you thread that needle, where that wasn't quite the case just in the underlying. I mean, Microsoft ran our own data centers, we built our own software, like we had our own stuff. So it was very different in that way. Um, so yeah, maybe the topic and the facts change, but the patterns are the same.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. I've also noticed that you talk about partnerships, and company partnerships that are helping to, I think this must be a key for you in accelerating value at scale, as you're very interested, I know, in doing. But and creating good company partnerships has been a role that you've had going back, I'll just say forever for shortness. But can you talk a little bit about your observations of how company partnerships help to achieve or accelerate achieving the vision for sustainability in particular, or maybe even about just what does it take to create effective partnerships? Because I've seen companies have the first meeting. You get executives in the room that seem like they have complementary businesses, maybe even complementary customer sets or lists, right? They have the first conversation, maybe the second one, and everybody's excited, but they can fall apart pretty quickly if they're not set up right. I'm just wondering
Yeah,
about what's been your view of the effectiveness of partnerships and how to make them really work.
well, I'm almost going to answer it with a question, which is, isn't everything a partnership? Just a question
Yeah.
of, is it an internal partnership or an external partnership,
Mm, okay.
right? So getting the head of division at CBRE or at Microsoft to agree to do something isn't all that radically different. It's a little less complicated because you don't need lawyers and all this other stuff that you have to document when you have an external partner. So it's definitely harder on an external partner, but it's conceptually the same thing. And it gets back to the whole like, where's the win-win-win scenario? If it's not going to be great for customers, it doesn't matter if you create a great partnership because nobody's going to care. If it's not great for the other company and you feel like, oh, somehow I've won
Hmm.
and they don't win, then it actually doesn't work. And they're just going to let the thing fall apart and never execute. And then you've got to have a win. And then frankly, you got to have a key stakeholder internally, whether it's yourself or somebody else, who just drives to close.
Hmm.
Right? Because yeah, we've all been part of those meetings, if we've been in the professional world for more than a few years, where great ideas, nothing happens.
I always felt that because I worked in high tech before I went into corporate real estate services as well. And I was always struck, and maybe this was just because it was early days, I was always struck that high tech was very programmed for corporate partnerships, whether it was VAR relationships or brand, or product related partnerships, right? And it was just more of a habituated or normalized way of going to market that I
Yeah,
felt compared to real estate.
but I think the thing is, so what's the biggest constraint that anyone listening or you or I ever have? Often it can be money, but it's more often than not time,
Hmm.
right? Like I could sit here with a yellow pad and come up with 20 partners I wish I had. But let's say I have the capacity to do 3 in a year. Are you deliberate in figuring out where the most leverage is?
Hmm.
Right. So I'd say it's not just like if I think about partnerships, that's the first question I ask everybody on my team. Frankly, with everything, and this would be a piece of advice I'd give to anybody who's at any point in their career, which is when you go into a conversation or a meeting, or if you have slides or a document, always start with the most important thing, right? Because a lot of times I'll find like I'll ask people in a meeting, I'm like, so it could be like, and I have this, where I've reviewed we have all these sectors at the company. I'm like, somebody comes into my office and they're like, hey, here's what I think we should do in 2026, since we're sitting at the end of 2025 while we're recording this. I'm like, great, what order are these in? And sometimes I see like a little bit of a deer in the headline. And I'm like, okay, there's 35 pages in this deck. I only want to talk about the most important 5 pages first. Which are they and why? And it forces you to get really focused, because the reality is there's 35 pages of great material, but they're not all equal. So, partnerships is a classic example of this. Some partnerships are easy, so people do them because they're easy, but they're really not very meaningful.
Yeah, one of the things I think I am hearing that I really like is don't just be opportunistic about partnerships, be more deliberate. Because if you're just being opportunistic, you might just work on the next one where someone says this is a good idea. But if you're really thinking about, 20 are possible, but how do we know which 3 are going to work the best mutually? That tells me we're being more proactive and more deliberate about what those partnerships should be for the overall kind of, when you put the chocolate with the peanut butter, what's the result,
Yeah. And I think somewhere along the line, and I'm sure most people listening have heard this too, which is like, don't confuse motion with progress. Mm. And so I think a lot of our movement, if I were to be critical, and including some of the things I've done in my career for sure, is I feel great about stuff that ultimately is not very significant. Because I was moving, I was doing something, I was creating a partnership, I was launching a product, or we're doing something interesting. But the reality is it didn't scale. So, okay, it's great. And in some cases, it taught me wonderful things. But many of those failed ventures were largely because I confused the ease of doing them with actually the impact they would have.
Well, and I saw some of that reflection in some comments you made after Climate Week, and the importance of what you're hearing out in the field, and also the importance of driving value, accelerating value at scale, right? Seems like partnerships is one of those tools, one of those strategies. Are there other things that you wish that you can talk about that you wish if I could get this going, I think that's the next phase of accelerating value at scale? What would help?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And without going too much into sort of things that we're thinking about here, it's two things. What's the framework and the guiding principles you use to make the bets? And it's different today for me at CBRE than it was at Microsoft. And, I had a private equity fund in between. But one of the early lessons I learned at Microsoft from actually he was the head of worldwide sales for the company, was like, hey, if you're going to go into a project or a meeting, have your guiding principles. Because that's the first thing you have to figure out. Because if you have that, then everything you look at either adheres to the guiding principles or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, that means either your guiding principles are wrong or the project is wrong. Hmm. And it sounds so simple. And I was like, okay. And then I was a little like, oh, I'll do this because he's pushing me and challenging me to do this. And I created all these guiding principles for something we're doing. And I went back to review it. And we spent the entire meeting just talking about that one slide, guiding principles. The guy, what about this? And he challenged every single thing, and I ended up rewriting the slide. And literally that became the foundation for what I did for the next 10 years. Oh. So that's the thing where I go it doesn't matter what the topic is and where you're going, which is, are you clear on what's guiding your decisions and what your framework is? And it should be fairly consistent over many, many years. That'll change a little bit as the markets change or maybe your perspective changes. But that was probably one of the greatest lessons I ever had, and it applies a ton in sustainability, but it applies to everything.
All right, I got to ask then, what's an example of a guiding principle that really works for you?
Guiding principle will be, does the project create impact at scale?
Okay.
All right, that's consistent with what we're just talking about.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, and that might be no, well, then maybe another guiding principle is, does it create a foundational building block for transformation of your industry? right? Yes, that in and of itself, it doesn't create scale, but it's a core ingredient to creating scale. So especially in the world of technology, that's how I think a lot about like agents and widgets and everything. And we can get into AI if we want, but like we're now building a series of AI tools, and we're constantly debating like which things do we build first or partner with or license first and why? And how do you think about it's not its direct impact, but its knock-on effect,
I see.
right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, so are we getting beyond generative AI now? Is AI going to get into building systems management, or is it already?
Oh, I'm sure it is. Yeah. It, yeah. I think we're in the super early innings.
Yeah. Do you have
Right?
any favorite use cases that you wish AI was solving for you at this point, or that you're hearing about? Or are
I'll
we
just say
still
stay tuned. We're just working on some stuff, and I don't really want to talk about it
okay?
publicly, other than think about manual systems that
Hmm.
are in place for many things that sit at the intersection of sustainability and real estate, and how do you actually digitize those?
Yeah. Okay. And I can't help but think of AI. I mean, it's so general and broad, right? But there's something there about. I want to ask you about your recommendations for skills for early career professionals and students coming out of undergrad, and something that you think they should focus on, and that you would love to be able to take advantage of, or see your teams take advantage of these fresh skills, right? One area that I know is important to you, that I think has come up even in a number of times when I've talked with others about skills for early careers and recent grads, is data related skills and data analytics, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like a rich area where new kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of junior staff in a big company can make a big difference. And when they're able to run analytics, find insights, bring them to leaders, et cetera. But I'm wondering about, this is sort of a two-pronged question, skills that you wish that you want to get into your organization, that you think undergrads should focus on, or early careers. I'm just wondering about, maybe I'll ask that first.
So I'll say like super strong opinion on this, which is take anything you see in the world of AI that seems interesting to you and that you have a passion for, and ask, can I apply it to the topic that I'm interested in? Right. So like we had a summer intern this summer who did exactly that, looking at the intersection of a bunch of stuff where these tools were being developed, frankly, for hospital systems. He's like, oh, I actually think it would be relevant over here. And I don't know if I would attribute that. I think it's partly because he's of a different generation in university still, and going through that process. And so just thinks differently. But like the moment we're in right now, the proliferation of AI and AI tools and concepts is so large that nobody can really, even AI agents can't parse through them effectively enough if you don't know how to ask. And so if you can go into a job or a career, and a lot of people ask me like over the years for career advice, I'm like, there is no path, right? There is no magic formula other than do something that you really love doing and are excited about. And if you're passionate about sustainability, figure out how to embed sustainability into that job. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you know, like, hey, I really am excited by decarbonization pathways and mechanical systems, yeah, you can very much hyper focus. But if you're not as clear as that, it's like, hey, what do you really love doing? Great. What's the sustainability angle of that if you're passionate about sustainability? Back to your question about AI. How do I bring AI into that world in a way that maybe my company that I'm talking with hasn't done? Or what's my unique perspective on that? Because like if I'm sitting across the table, and I do when I'm hiring junior people, I love it when they sort of say, hey, I've been thinking about like this app, and like, could we apply it to this scenario? And even if the answer is no, it's like, it shows me that they're thinking like, oh, how do I add value in unique ways that the company hasn't already thought about?
Okay. Well, and so the sustainability aspect of that makes total sense, because some people might be interested in jobs with sustainability titles, and some might be interested in just making sure they're connecting, right, and supporting sustainability progress. And but back when you were setting goals and Microsoft was setting goals, I feel like early adopter companies in the 2007s, 8s, 9s, et cetera, were looking very broadly about sustainability, environmental sustainability, let's say. And I felt like I was seeing every early adopters were looking to tackle waste, water, energy, carbon, right? The kind of a broad range of environmental sustainability topics. I feel like maybe this is just me, that the emphasis has become more and more on carbon emissions and energy. And maybe that's right. Maybe it's not, or maybe I'm just seeing some kind of
Yeah, but I
selection
would say
bias.
if we were talking to a bunch of data center operators, it'd be like, oh, yeah, no, water.
Okay.
Energy, yes, water, yes,
Okay.
right? If we're talking to other industries, they're going to be interested in plastics and plastics recycling and PET and all that. Like, so it depends on where you go. You're going to have
Yeah.
maybe a different list. Yeah, but I think the most common denominator is energy and carbon.
Yeah. I think I'll say this and maybe people will prove me wrong, but I feel like the corporate goals have started getting more narrower at, for good reasons, energy and carbon. Um, but you're right, plastics, water, waste are always going to be there. So there's room for everybody, I guess.
Yeah, there are
Yeah,
more than enough problems to go solve.
yeah. Um, Now you sit where you can see really globally, if not galactically, about these issues. I'm wondering about, are you seeing differentiations still or now about regions of the world and their cultures, business practices, business interests, government involvement?
Oh yeah, for
What's
sure.
varying around the world now for you? What are you
Oh
seeing?
yeah. And it always varies around the world and it varies within a given area. I mean, just look at the US. Certain
Yeah.
states are very different and more aggressive on this topic than others, right? And so um, it has always been like that. And sometimes, like right now, it's a little bit more acute, the chasm. But there are plenty of places, if you go to Europe, you go to the UK, you go to parts of APAC, Australia, like there's a pretty large focus on it for sure at a level that I think, if we're just focusing on the Americas, not as strong a focus right now.
Hmm.
Right, but but like we should just talk about, we're like back to where we started this conversation, which is saving a ton of money on energy. I don't care what your geography is. Like I can have a conversation in any geography with any company about sustainability.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there are regional differences in environmental conditions too that can change conversations. If you just start with what are our most important issues, like, you mentioned Australia, you would expect to have conversations about water scarcity. And um, I we were talking with a guy who runs a company focused on food waste and how culturally you're going to have a different conversation about where food waste happens in the value chain. It's going to be a different conversation in London versus the US versus Africa, right? Or where some places they're just, you can't afford to have food waste. So it's not even a concept that makes sense. But um, it truly is one of those fields where you can be global and local. Any Have you seen, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but have you seen kind of projects that um, that you feel like this really local project was a great example of solving a local issue that surprised you or that stands out from someplace?
Well, I think if you look at, I mean, there's tons of them, but like water reclamation projects in
Mhm.
multiple areas. You've got um, certainly community solar, right? That is by
Mhm.
definition community. And it's been a powerful accelerant of solar energy here in the US, let alone other places. So those kinds of things for sure. And then sort of as you go further and further, like if you go into the science areas, and thinking about how you think about ecosystems or species or green infrastructure. And there's a whole bunch of people way more skilled at this than I am, but like, how do you look at the advanced math models, and then how do you actually use technology to drive that? I mean, we created this whole program called AI for Earth, early days of AI, just for this exact thing, which is how do you take massive data sets more often than not at a hyper-local level and extrapolate out insights that you couldn't do without massive computing power.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And the massive computing power, we need that for the benefits. It's always such a tension, right, between, wow, look at all the water and energy that are used by data centers and this massive computing power, but also we have to consider what are the issues that are getting solved by that massive computing power. It's not just the inputs. We have to consider the value of the outputs.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, any final thoughts on advice to students who are going to go into the job market that want to have that same kind of meaning in their work? Final thoughts on what you'd want students to think about, or people who are just getting started in their careers?
I think it's just, again, what I said earlier, which is find things that you're passionate about, because it's not unique to sustainability or in the work that we're talking about here, which is over the course of a career, there are many hard moments. And if you're not really passionate about what you're doing, it becomes much more difficult to get through those moments. Right. So I hope a lot of the people listening are passionate about sustainability and then figure out either how to get into I'll use the air quotes, the career of sustainability, but more importantly, whatever they do, just bring it to that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Because unless it's permeated everywhere, we don't solve these problems at scale.
Great. Yeah. Well, Rob, thank you again so much for being part of the podcast and for your words of wisdom and experience and sharing your experiences with our students and other early career professionals. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Great to see you again.